warthog attacks, but the shipwright's instincts are too sharply honed. He dodges out of the way, placing himself in striking position. With this project, I wanted to pull back the curtain on the creation process. One thing that's been nice about that transparency is that I can be honest about what I'm thinking as I go. When I made Tellurian, I had very different constraints. There was a solid outline with a beginning, middle, and end. I had given myself a manageable but non-negotiable release schedule of an image a week. It was also structured as illustrated pages, like movie stills, as opposed to framed comic book pages. There were times when I would have indulged in more action-focused moments, maybe using 5 images for a fight instead of just 1. But with how big that project felt at the time, I didn't feel like I could afford to. For over 3 years, it felt like I had a tiger by the tail and I was holding on for dear life. This time around, instead of an outline, I have a premise and I have a very definite ending that may literally be one of the oldest spoilers in human history. The ultimate size of this project is, currently, completely unknown. I'm using a classic Sunday comic style format. Instead of releasing a set number of panels or pages per week, I just have to release something that moves the project forwards. This new format means that I can finally indulge in action. Well, indulge is maybe a bit misleading. I'm not a fan of action for action's sake. To me, the most boring scenes in any movie or show are the ones where the story comes to a grinding halt so characters can shoot or fight each other for 5 minutes. I think that an example of it done well is John Wick. It's 90% action, but just about every act of violence changes the scenario. Characters must react to new circumstances because of every action taken. The goal I'm setting out for myself is to use action scenes as intentionally as possible. I want each shot to reveal something about each character, and for every drawing to move the story forwards. In this case, the warthog has proven himself to be reckless and aggressive. If you're new, just before this, he leapt off his mount at full sprint and punched a dragon in the mouth. In his fury, he's attacking with both fists, and as you can see, he's leaving himself wide open. Meanwhile, the shipwright, at 7'5", is smaller by comparison, but highly experienced. He's also slow to take another person's life, unless he's left with no other alternative. So you can see that while he's taking advantage of his opponent's temper, he's positioned himself for a non-lethal strike with the shaft of his axe. Another way to explain what I'm going for is X-Men 2 versus X-Men 3. In X-Men 2, the characters use their mutant abilities in really clever ways that only they could do. Magneto escapes his prison by extracting the iron that was injected into his guard's blood, and later, instead of fighting a squad of soldiers, he pulls the pins out of their grenades. In X-Men 3, it felt like everyone was just shooting their powers at each other. Ice powers, you shoot ice at people. Fire powers, you shoot fire. Bone powers, you shoot bones, I guess. I want this project to be a lot more like X-Men 2. Characters revealing more about themselves, their abilities, and their goals through action. The stack of aspirations I'm building for myself on this project is starting to get really high. For this next, smaller panel, I wanted to show the strike land. I zoomed in on a drawing of the mask and worked out where the man's head would be inside of it. I haven't shown it yet, but I already have some sketches of what he looks like under there. He'll probably be revealed a few videos from this one. In his first iteration, he was meant to die in this opening story, and we'd never actually see what he looked like. But since I have some tentative plans for him, he gets to be a bit more robust. With his head in position, I drew the part of the mask that broke under the shipwright's axe. I was thinking of it as a swift strike to the temple. Pieces go flying, including the bronze eye. These close-ups are satisfying to make because they let me get into the tactility of things. It's simple, but I enjoyed creating the breathable woven areas around the nose and jaw. I colored it up and added some super simple gradients to create a bit more depth, and I called it done. For this next panel, we get an establishing shot of the God of the Hunt's camp. I could just draw it, but it's too perfect of an opportunity for me to learn, so I'm taking it. There will be several panels that take place in this location, so I'd be building some simple models anyway. And if I'm building simple models, I could build slightly better models. My hope is to build up a library of assets that can be used in many future episodes. Ultimately, it would be awesome to have a huge collection of models that can be used to either assist in creating backgrounds or just be used directly as backgrounds. Leaning on my Art Deco inspiration, I sketched up an assortment of pillars based on 30s and 40s designs. Obviously, the inspiration needs to be filtered through the constraints of this setting. This first pillar is meant to be somewhat universal. I hesitate to say generic, but that works too. Something that can be used in many contexts. Thematically, I used a plant motif, the builders being inspired by the world around them. But that got me thinking. This world is more advanced than a lot of people have historically wanted to believe. They'd be inspired by more than just the world around them. They'd be inspired by the underlying principles of the world around them. Enter the golden ratio. It's not the solution for everything, just most things. When in doubt, use it as a guide for your proportions and everything will feel likable. I started using it as a guide to shape this remote outpost temple, and it just felt right. That made me take a second look at the pillar I had drawn. Once you bring the golden ratio into things, it's hard to let go. I figured I should run the pillar through the same loose system. I'm glad to see that they didn't vary that dramatically, but I definitely like the updated version more. With a pillar, I could start building with it, laying some out in a row and adding some stone slabs across the top. I definitely want to make excessive use of colossal stone foundations that have been moved and ground into place using sound technology. I thought of a couple ideas for things that could occupy the space between the pillars. A banner is a simple option. My second wall was completely overcooked, and in the end I decided to use the same pattern I'd already used on the pillars. Now, please, I have to make this abundantly clear. If you want to learn how to use 3D, go watch someone else's videos for that. I am still flailing around, and I have to stop every 10 minutes to go watch a tutorial to remind myself how to do something I just did an hour ago. When it comes to texturing these models, I still want them to look like I drew them. So for now, I'm using line and flat color to represent all of the materials. That may change down the road, but for now, I think it looks cool, and it's a safe place for me to cut my teeth on the process. My Sabertooth and Dragon patrons were incredibly helpful. I posted some of my work-in-progress screenshots in our private Discord, and several of them gave me pointers that probably shot me ahead by several months. So much of this is just getting familiar with the tools. After drawing a few shots of dense jungle, I knew there had to be a better way. I'd like to have a really big library of hand-drawn plants that I can mix and match when needed. We discussed multiple options for creating the outline around leaves, from freestyle to grease pencil to geometry and shader-based solutions. Ultimately, what seems to work best for now is just to draw the outline myself and keep them as transparent PNGs. As these ferns and palms came together, I was starting to get excited. I think they look really cool. Since I drew and sculpted the things, they still feel like something I made. With a few small variations, I also felt like I could get a ton of variety out of a small amount of assets. This seems to be working. I added the wall piece between the pillars. When I decided to use the same pattern on both the wall and the pillar, it wasn't for the sake of simplicity, but that was a happy accident. I could just use the exact same texture. And then I decided to change the texture. The red stone looks great in contrast to the oxidized copper, but I want these to look more like granite. I also realized that on big flat surfaces like this, they'd benefit from some smaller detail to help indicate volume. I added the smallest amount of color variation I thought I could get away with, and I added what I think of as Mobius texture lines across the surface. I veered off course in this process. I'm building way more than my scene will require, but I've told myself that it was for the sake of learning, and you can't convince me otherwise. The Golden Ratio Temple was crying out to be built. Looking back at it now, I'm going to be rebuilding it entirely, which is great. They say that building your first house teaches you how to build your second. If you want a relaxing, meditative exercise, I highly recommend drawing megalithic stone walls. I had fun thinking about each massive rock being vibrated into place, stone seeming to melt into stone as it settled into its spot on top of the last layer. For now, this is just surface treatment, but in the future, I'd like to experiment with actual texture and depth and some high contrast shadows so that this line work acts in support. With some solid foundations, I wanted to shove them into place as soon as possible to see how they looked. Lots more to do, but the concept is there. At this point, I had built a few simple pieces. It was time to see what was possible. Stress tests like this help to show where the most obvious holes are, which helps to determine what to work on next. I think the most pressing thing for next time will be creating more detailed, human-scale pieces that can be used in the foreground. A lot of this stuff might work for distant vistas, but it won't work up close. As soon as I started pulling in the plants, I started having way too much fun. Thankfully, these models are incredibly simple, so I could just pile them on, and I did. With a small scene, I experimented with different lighting conditions. I wanted to see how this might look in a sunset, or under moonlight. This small section of the temple seemed to work well, so I kept running rampant and expanded outwards. And with that, I had the ruins of an Art Deco temple in the jungle. I massively overshot the requirements of my thumbnail sketch by a large margin. However, I can't tell you how much I learned doing all of this, and how excited I am about the potential that I see here. Next week, I'll try to use some of these assets, and more importantly, the knowledge I've acquired, to create the establishing shot of the camp. See you then.